USP of a business? Can that be an IP protected?
I don't know how you'd protect that. I mean, that's where you come back to, there's a USP, unique selling point. You come back to trade secrets, know-how. You can trademark or copyright the brand, of course, if that makes a difference. But the important thing in that situation, as you're building the company, is to keep it secret, really, not to leak it. Now, that's really difficult. If you want to talk to somebody else about something and get their advice, actually keeping that to yourself is basically impossible. If you want, it's fine if you're going to a lawyer or an IP or an accountant or a intellectual property lawyer, a patent agent, that's fine because that relationship's known. But if you want to talk to a supplier, say, about it, say you need some hardware or something manufactured, you'd probably use an NDA there, but talking to a mentor, I mean, how are you going to share that with a mentor? You won't expect the mentor to sign the NDA. You've just got to it's got to be a trust relationship because in the end, it's to do with trust anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, we usually come across because when I'm guiding startups and new emerging student aspirants who are trying to go in startup and becoming a founder, they are very concerned about sharing the idea what they want to start in, until and unless it is having its own legs and hands to start working.
Yeah.
So I think intellectual property is one of the key areas that they should focus on. And I mean, we understand what is IP now, and I think why it is there and what it works and how it is. Why it is important for a startup, and how crucial is this for them?
It's important for the reasons I've said. One, to raise funding. An investor needs to understand there is some intellectual property there, not necessarily defensible at that point, but can be made defensible, because no investor wants to invest in an organization, or very few anyway, that's competing on price. They've got to compete on something else, because and that something else is a level of defensibility, either because it can't be copied or because it's really, really difficult to copy. So that's why it's really important if you're going down the investor route. Otherwise, if you're just building a service business, I mean, the intellectual property in the service business is actually the people. It's the brand, the customers you already got, and the people. So that's why selling a service business is really difficult, because you can't sell people. People can walk. They can get a job somewhere else.
Yeah. Are there any complexities involved in the IP?
Complexities,
yeah.
Huge complexities, yes. I mean, defining it to start with, what I think of as IP may be different from what you think of as IP in a particular business. Some cases it's really obvious. Say it's a molecule that's going to be used in a particular way for a disease. You then patent that molecule. That's very obvious, because the molecule is defined completely as a chemical formula. So that's one end of the spectrum. A software process. How do you define a software process? Software, I don't know if you've ever written software, but you can always rewrite a piece of software so it does the same thing as a black box, not with AI, of course, but so something goes in and something comes out. What's happening in there can be very different, written by different programmers. So that's much more difficult to protect. It's complex.
Yeah. So do you think it is very subjective? IP is very subjective. It's not defined.
At one end of the spectrum, as I say, it's very specific. And then there is a point where it starts to, quite soon actually, where it becomes subjective. And that's why, of course, you really need a patent lawyer somewhere to take your patent claims and just check it's not being copied. You're not, you can actually patent it. And in the end, a government or the European Patent Office has got to make the final decision, if you're using a patent, that can be patented. And then you'll get to the position. There's a company here in Cambridge I was involved with as a shareholder, where there was a massive patent case where a massive company in the States said, you can't do it that way. And in fact, what happened was that they won initially, on an appeal they lost. And the total cost to these two companies together would have been 10 or 15 or even $20 million to fight over this thing.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned in the molecules can be patented, can they?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, if you take many people know I've got late stage cancer. I'm using a tablet I take every day. This is from a company here in Cambridge, actually, AstraZeneca. It's their best-selling drug, and it's it's got an ingredient in it which is fighting my cancer extremely well. You know, I've had this cancer now for nearly 2.5 years, and the chemical structure is on the Wikipedia page. So this is patented. It's just a combination of, you know, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, and carbon. Molecules, atoms. Sorry. Yeah.
So it's a unique combination. That, you know, the chemical structure and the formula
Exactly.
that you're using to make,
exactly.
Say.
And they do protect that, because anybody, I showed it to somebody else, and they said yes, he could copy that. Obviously, not legally, and so of course lots of people are copying it, because AstraZeneca makes $7 billion a year out of it. But AstraZeneca then are protecting their intellectual property, because it's cost them maybe $1 billion to develop this.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the amount of research goes in.
Yeah, exactly.
Doing one thing,
and then of course not just the one; it's the 40, 50 other ones that didn't work, which they spent hundreds of millions of dollars on. Exactly. They've got to protect that as well.
Yes, that's true. So, what sort of startups should they really focus on their IP? Is it for everybody?
Definitely not. So first of all, if you've got something that's coming out of a research lab, generally you will do that, because it will be something very novel, a new material structure, a new method of measuring something. There are many, certainly in Cambridge University, as the other university here in Cambridge, there are lots of labs that are producing stuff that are patentable. So you definitely should do that. But it doesn't always work. I'll give an example. In fact, I just come off the board of a company that did patent something which is to do with fire suppression in the home. So it puts fires out in a home environment, and they patent a method of using it in the kitchen, and it cost probably about £60,000, £70,000 to patent, and it's never been used. You know, the product moved on to a different direction. So. Because it's a combination of, you know, it does cost money to create patents and to maintain them, because of all the costs of, you know, mostly the patent lawyers. And then you've got to think, A, is it going to be of value in the longer term? And B, much more importantly, if we get to the point where we have to defend it, can we afford to defend it against a big company? And that's the big issue, because a big company's got a big chunk of money to fire at defending it. They used to say a defence of a patent, a sort of upper-end patent, would cost several $1 million for each party. So, you know, look at it the other way, though. And if this is a company that's been grown, has taken equity investment in and wants to sell itself, the company that's acquiring probably does want to see some patents, if they were available, in belonging to the company, because they're useful for them, because they'll be able to defend them much better. So having patents, although is quite expensive and is very difficult to defend, could well be worth it if you are trying to grow a company to exit it.
Yeah, and the accelerators here in the picture, we talk about accelerators. So do you think they help in navigating through the intellectual property that's, you know?
That will vary. It will vary depending on the sort of mentors they have on that program. But in all cases, they will have access to a patent lawyer, an IP lawyer. And most lawyers, and these aren't just IP lawyers, but other lawyers, will give a 20 minutes or half an hour for free to discuss that. So if you've got something you think is patentable, the thing to do is to ring up or email 2 or 3 patent lawyers and just have a chat about it. And they'll say, yes, possibly. And then, of course, they're trying to win clients. So, you know, that's why they're doing it. It's a bit of sales work. Or they'll say, no, you just can't do it. But even if it's not a patent, you should certainly trademark your brand, your website, potentially. Not if it's, you know, if it's never going to be that important, or you trademark the product name if you've got one. So those are very cheap, though. Those are talking about hundreds of euros, hundreds of pounds.
So how about purchasing a domain? So once you purchase a domain of your website,
yes,
does it mean that that's yours now and trademark?
It's the domain itself, including the suffix, is definitely yours. So.
Yes. Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that somebody can't change the suffix. I'm often getting emails from China, as it turns out, saying I have my books are under investor.com. I had one yesterday actually saying somebody wants to register investor.cn, which is China.
Yes.
Do you mind? And I just ignore them the whole time. So yes, you definitely got it within that suffix, but you haven't got it within. And there are so many suffixes now, scores and scores of suffixes. So if it really matters to you, then you'd need to trademark the investor, which I have done actually, which it didn't cost me much, probably £100 or £200, which I've got to renew every few years.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, somebody could put a hyphen in, and you're not covered. Well, you're certainly not covered in the domain name. You could probably argue, if you could be bothered, to sue them for copying that domain, copying something that's very similar. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. We're talking about IP. So, what are some of the strategies that a startup can use to have IP as a competitive advantage over the others?
The most important thing to do is to investigate what the IP is, to understand that, particularly when if you're going to talk to investors, and then get enough mentoring or research on the internet or whatever, talking to IP lawyers, to work out what you have that's unique and what can be protected. But bear in mind, as I say, know-how, which is not protectable, is also unique. So keeping it secret. And the issue tends to be there is that somebody might be an employee of a company, leave the company, and they'll leave with whatever's in their head. Hopefully they won't leave with anything else. That would be illegal, but they'll leave with what's in their head. And you can't really control what they can use in their head. So keeping stuff secret. Apple are renowned for this, for making sure the whole company is siloed so that somebody in a particular department hasn't a clue what's going on in the rest of the company. They are really, really strict on IP policy.
Yeah. So my next question is about what are some of the emerging technologies or industries where IP is becoming more important and challenging?
So emerging, if you take AI, which is obviously emerging at the moment, I'm not aware of any patentable parts of that. A, because it's software, and software is difficult to patent, and B, because the core AI is becoming a platform now. So the core of the AI itself is being worked on, of course, but generally it's already out there. So if you're going to do something in the AI space, you won't be patenting any form of the AI itself. It'll be the application of that AI, if you can do that. And I really don't know whether you could do that or not. Other forms of emerging technologies, you're talking about. Well, have you heard of the Gartner hype curve? Have you ever heard of that? It's worth looking that up. This is where stuff is on the hype curve. So it's there's some. What happens is that people get more and more excited about things like AI, and then they get delusioned about it. And then some of them carry on and actually become commonplace. Automated cars. And we're all very excited about it, but actually we're not. We're probably disillusioned about that now. So that's what emerging technologies are on that list. It's well worth googling that.
Yeah. No, it usually happens with the product and the company where they're at early stages, they're slightly growing, and at some point they go into peak stage and start declining. There's a cyclic process.
Yeah.
But also, you rightly mentioned about the emerging technologies, AI. Might be in the future there is something else coming up to compete AI or advance it in AI.
Yeah, exactly.
The robots you're talking about, and the cars, the automated cars you're talking about. There's a lot of things coming up, so we're not sure how this is going to turn out to be the excitement and then the balance of going ahead in long run.
Yeah.
I think we're still trying to see how AI is fitting in our daily life, but there are a lot of companies started adopting AI into their own a company structure, and now through AI they are helping the chatbots. The chatbots have come, so AI is responding to those questions if there is coming up like that, and I think it is slowly getting into
they're going into the process,
Yeah.
internal process of companies. Yeah.
With regards to IP, I have a very burning question here to ask. When a lot of AI platforms, they generate images auto-generated as you ask.
Yeah.
So if you ask someone on the moon, it just generates an image. And once it is generated, what about the IP? Is someone owns it? Is AI owns it? Who owns it?
I don't know, and because I'm not an IP lawyer and I haven't even read what's happening there. I mean, if you take the other way around, the media companies are frightened to death of their IP being consumed and hoovered up and reused by AI companies. You've seen that. Some of the newspapers are refusing to provide information now to some of the big tech giants. But if you take an image like that's appeared on your screen, I suspect at that point that's probably yours, because if you put in the same parameters into the AI engine again, you probably get something else, because the AIs are learning, aren't they? So they would probably portray your combination of terms in a different way, because there's no fixed point in the journey of AI's learning, is there?
Yeah.
There's no, some other questions have been asked, or some other images have been generated at the same time or in the last few minutes, or are being done. So if you ask again using the same things a day later, the chances are, and I haven't tried this, but the chances are you'll get a different image. So therefore it's only a single snapshot.
Yeah.
So in that situation, it in principle ought to be yours, because it's not just your search terms, it's also the time point when you ask the question.
Yeah, exactly. It's generating a very unique
Yeah.
all the time you ask. So, and it's not recreating the same image to anywhere in the world. So
Exactly.
that's the question. Is
But
about
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what the answer is to your question.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that's just
but-
my view.
Yeah, this is definitely an emerging thing coming up, and people are just trying to adjust with the new technology and figuring out where it will stand in
Yeah.
regards to the ownership and furthermore. So when a startup is trying to enter the accelerator or choosing the best one, which one to go for, with regards to IP, what are few key things they should be careful, or they should be aware at least of?
Back to what I said, they need to work out what their IP is, and many companies, many younger entrepreneurs won't really know what it is. They'll know they have an idea, and obviously they think that's unique. They won't know that until they do some market research or do some Googling or whatever, talk to other people. But they've got to define, they've got to investigate what they believe their IP is, and then have a matrix of that, and how they can, or not really a matrix, a workflow, how they can how and if they should protect it, and how to do that protection. So they must be able to verbalize and obviously put on some slides what specific IP they're offering, not just in case there's an external investor or going onto an accelerator, but for their own use, because an IP progress, or a roadmap of IP is really important for the company, because that shows what they're going to be doing over the next 3 or 5 years. For the investor, because they can see where they're going. I mean, I've just had a board meeting this morning where we're talking about, it's a med tech company, we're talking about a new test for this year, which we're working on. We're also talking about some new tests, these are blood tests, for next year. So that's the roadmap. And as we go along, we'll patent the bits we can do. But having this process, both the snapshot when you come to apply for the accelerator, apply for funding, and the longer-term roadmap's really critical.
Yeah. And what do you envision the future of the accelerator programs and its impact on the startup?
Well, it's strange because they've been around quite a long time, and there's no doubt some of them have died. So they've just proved, in the end, an accelerator is a business in itself, and in order to be sustainable, it needs, by business, I mean, it needs resources, it may need premises, or might be online, of course, only, but it certainly needs human beings, and those human being needs paying. So it needs some means of creating an income for itself, unless it's fully charitable, and even then it needs grants. So, and because of that, some of these accelerators have faded away. Some have merged together. The one I talked about earlier on with Arachnys, that merged with Techstars many years ago, probably 10 years ago, because it just wasn't sustaining in itself. So I believe accelerators will be around for a very long time, because I think it's a great method of helping many companies of growing. the corporates got involved. Sorry, I keep knocking the microphone. I hope you can't hear that. The corporates got involved with them about a long time ago. I remember in London, one of the very first corporate accelerators was, do you know a company called Telefonica, which owns the O2 brand in the UK? Yeah, the mobile. Yeah. They worked it out probably 15 years ago. In their case, they wanted companies that were going to help them in some way or other. And there was one that I looked up quite closely, which exited, there wasn't always exited to Telefonica, to the company, but provided all the software for all the retail outlets in Brazil, as it turned out, which is probably 12,000 retail outlets or whatever. So the corporate accelerators will continue in the same way as their own internal innovation departments, because big corporates are not very agile, and therefore having some sort of innovation internally or associated with them really helps with their own ideas and the agility of getting stuff done.
Yeah. So you mentioned about where can a startup get some information about IP? It's through lawyers, to speaking to someone, or the Googling some of the stuff that's available online. But do you recommend any tools or resources that the startups can go to and get more information about IP before they head off into it?
I don't know of any tools, but I think what we've just talked about is quite enough to start with, and of course that will then unearth other ways of. There is a company in Wales called Ingot, which does. It's a commercial company, so it charges. It does. Value intangible assets, and IP on a balance sheet term, in financial terms, is an intangible asset. IP, as you can imagine, is a set of ideas that can be written down, but it can't be held in the hand. So it's not a tangible asset; it's an intangible asset.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have covered a lot about the IP, the accelerator program, and what impact it is there for startups. And the journey, I think, is much more in depth. We talked about basic things about IP and how it's going forward. Why it is important for the startups to take forward. Heading to conclusion now. So, is there any message you want to leave us before we close today?
Yeah, so I only just mentioned the fact that they can be virtual. I know that Y Combinator, which was set up by a British guy in the Silicon Valley some years ago, did go virtual about 8-9 years ago, and I was mentoring a guy who was working on something which I didn't want to invest in, again to do with the fire industry actually, and he moved to be a virtual member of Y Combinator. And then actually that led him to moving out to California, pivoting his business, raising some capital and moving on from there. So you don't necessarily have to assume that you've got to live. I mean, a good example might be there are many, many great entrepreneurs in India, and not all of them can afford to go on accelerator programs in developing world. A, there might be a visa issue. B, there's certainly a cost issue. So people do have these virtual accelerator programs. And so don't just assume you need an accelerator program in the locality. The one thing against that, I'd say, is part of which we haven't covered yet, part of the benefit of being an accelerator are the other entrepreneurs and the cohort you're working with, because you'll spend time together and learn from them. And as we all know, with COVID, etc., the actual learning process when you're in the same room is more efficient than doing it on Zoom meetings. So just chattering away, walking over to see somebody else, going out for a beer or a pizza with them, etc., works really well. So that's another major asset of being on an accelerator or an incubator, because again, you're in the same sort of space, hopefully physically rather than virtually. Yeah. But don't just assume that if you're in rural India that you can't go on an accelerator.
I think after post-COVID, if you see situations have changed, now people are trying to adopt a virtual world, and now they're thinking this is trustworthy. If not before COVID, things where online was really not of that importance mode of communication than compared to the others. So things have changed over these years after pandemic particularly. So I think that's a great advice. We can use the virtual ones as a platform, even particularly for students as well, if they are not ready for investment of going that much in detail. They can still adopt for going virtual or that other format.
Good.
Yeah. Perfect. So I can see some of the books lying over here. Please talk us through.
Yeah, so this is my first book. It's about 5 years ago now, or 6 years ago now, which was aimed at angels to teach them how to find the startups to invest in and work with them. But actually, of the 4,000 or so copies that have been bought, about 3,500 have gone to entrepreneurs like you. So, and in here, there's a lot of information about the IP and how it matters. It's not the core of it, but there's quite a lot in there. There's also about 100 or just under 100 podcasts associated with it, including one that's specifically about IP, which you could find on our website. Yeah.
In this book, okay.
Yeah. So there's a link on the website, and B, there are the podcasts there. And just briefly, although you haven't seen this book yet, but we have talked about it. So this is my latest book. This is very different. This is about my life and how I've coped with a number of tragedies in it. Public Success, Private Grief, which is being launched in 3 weeks' time here in Cambridge. And I'm actually giving a talk at ARU, which you may not be aware of, in the beginning of June about the book.
Yes.
Yeah,
You have a book launch, yes.
Yeah. Well, the actual official book launch is on the 17th of April, but this is an
in
ARU.
June we have got ARU.
Exactly,
Yes.
ARU, which is now, as of 2 hours ago, and this is, I don't know when this will go out, but we're in the end of March now, is available on Amazon for pre-order. So
It's already there for pre-order now?
as of this morning, yeah.
Oh, nice. I can't wait. I think this is the first time I'm seeing this book, and so I can't wait to have my own copy. And
Well, I've got one here which you can easily, and I've got a method of collecting some money from you.
I can read it through. Now, I had a brief outline. Somewhere I read about this book, the brief outline. And, we met in the previous podcast and we talked through. But still, there were a few things that came up as like, we did not discuss about this thing before. So, so there are a lot of things, new things. I think I can find it here, I'm sure. So,
This is about my life and the tragedies I've been through. Unfortunately, I mentioned my cancer.
Yeah.
There are other ones, of course, worse than that, unfortunately. And despite those tragedies, I've actually been, not successful, maybe that's the wrong term, honorary doctorate, thank you very much, from ARU, lots of other things, Angel of the Year, Angel of the whatever, and I've achieved that and given back. I've mentored 1,000 plus entrepreneurs, I've invested in 150, etc., etc. I've given a lot back, and so somehow I've coped and grown from the tragedies I've unfortunately had to go through.
No, of course, your story is very inspiring and filled with resilience. So I can't wait to read through it and gain some insights and some tips for me navigating through the difficult times.
I hope so. I hope anybody who reads it will find something, even though it's not directly connected with the things I've been through. That's what it's about. It's inspiring. It's to inspire others.
Yes. Definitely. Thank you so much. And we are looking forward to see you at the book launch and in June at ARU. So all the listeners, if this podcast goes before the book launch, you're most invited to be part of the ARU's book launch event of this newly launching book, Public Success and
Private Grief.
Grief.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, Peter, for being on the show. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.